Welcome to this short introduction to environmental justice. Justice is a crucial element of environmental policy at the local as well as the international level. Justice among countries is important, but justice within countries, namely between rich and poor, is probably even more important. Do you recognize what is shown on this photo? It was taken in Paris during the 2019 Yellow Vest protests. Those protests are a good illustration of the essence of environmental and climate justice. French citizens protested against a tax that aimed to make fossil fuels more expensive. The intention was to disincentivize the use of fossil fuels, which is one of the main causes of climate change. But the social aspect should not be neglected, as demonstrated by this case. If a policy hits the less well-off disproportionately hard, or if they have the impression that this is the case, then the policy will not be accepted by parts of the population. Have you seen this movie? It's already from 2000, but still worth watching if you have the chance. It illustrates well what environmental justice at the local level is about. Erin Brockovich is a consumer advocate, and the movie is about her fight for a local community that lived along the fence lines of an industrial facility which polluted the groundwater with hexavalent chromium. As a consequence, many people fell severely ill. They sued the company and received a large sum to compensate for their damage. This is not only a case of compensatory justice. It also shows that environmental justice is not only an analytical approach, but also a social movement. We now turn to the analytical approach. Environmental justice is in a number of cases divided into three aspects: distributive justice, procedural justice, and recognitional justice. There are, however, additional aspects that mostly could be grouped in the category of distributive justice, but they have a specific focus, and labeling everything distributive justice makes us lose some nuance. For this reason, let's rather differentiate 6 elements or perspectives of justice. Distributive justice focuses on the output of a process, such as negotiations or decisions by an authority. It is about how the costs of a certain measure are distributed. For example, should poor people pay less than rich people? Distributive justice is also about how the benefit of a certain measure or of nature in general is distributed. Should everyone get the same share of the pie? Distributive justice can be applied to the level of countries, but it also is very relevant at the level of individuals. Global commons, such as the atmosphere or deep oceans, cannot be owned by nations or individuals. Nonetheless, the global north has made more use of the global commons than the global south. This is about the distribution of benefits. In addition, the global north has externalized certain risks, such as the risks associated with climate change, that tend to be greater in the global south. Compensatory justice is closely linked to distributive justice. It is about compensation for damage that the action of certain people or countries caused for other people or countries. For example, should countries that suffer from the consequences of climate change, although they have not emitted many greenhouse gases, receive compensation from those countries that have emitted many greenhouse gases? Intergenerational justice is also closely linked to distribution, namely distribution among generations. Should we act now and pay the costs of ambitious climate policy so as to minimize global temperature increases? Or should we leave it up for future generations to solve the problem, if it's not too late by then? The 1987 Brundtland Report emphasized intergenerational justice by defining sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Procedural justice is about how decisions are made. When people are involved in the process, can provide input, are aware of what is negotiated and how certain decisions came about, the output of the process can be considered fair, since everyone could voice their position. Yet, in international negotiations, procedural justice often is very tricky. Every country sends a delegation, but they tremendously vary in size. Large and wealthy countries send delegations of 100 or 50 people, while small countries send delegations of 2 or 3 people. This means that larger delegations can be at more places at the same time and bring experts on the many technical details that are subject to the negotiations. Recognitional justice refers to respect for difference. People should not dominate others for arbitrary reasons, such as their gender, color, or beliefs. Discrimination can arise from the rights allocated by formal and customary institutions. For example, formal tenure rules or inheritance rules can privilege male land ownership. Discrimination can also arise from informal cultural norms. For example, even where land tenure rules do not openly discriminate against women, more pervasive cultural norms can still lead to women owning less land than men, or being less likely to receive compensation if that land is taken, for example, to make way for a protected area. Additionally, discrimination can arise from privileging some forms of knowledge over others. Typically, this involves the recognition of modern scientific knowledge systems, but the failure to recognize alternative and local knowledge systems. Interspecies justice is about justice between humans and nature. Animals' rights is an example of not only awarding rights to humans, but also to animals. Nature parks, to preserve nature for its own sake, are another example. Let's return to international politics. There, distributive justice is enshrined in the common but differentiated responsibility principle that was first adopted in the 1992 Rio Declaration. It is an important principle in a number of environmental and climate negotiations and treaties. But it also is a very controversial one, since it is very vague. The interpretation of how to differentiate responsibilities has been subject to much debate. Countries interpret it differently, depending on their situation and national interest. Environmental and climate justice are multifaceted concepts that vary depending on issue, context, and analyst. Environmental and climate justice plays an important role from the local up to the global level. But essentially, it is about bridging cleavages between rich and poor.